Hi. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here, all the students, the teachers, and everyone. I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces, so everyone from the UPF community, and also other people who have decided to join us today. So special thanks to Nuria, of course, for the kind invitation and also for the kind words. And also for putting together this amazing masters, which you know I'm a huge fan. And so I'm truly happy to be here. So I will try to start by explaining you how this all started. And I wanted to share with you my screen. So this started because Nuria invited me to talk about, she said, I want you to talk about your view on feminism. And so then I told her that I didn't have such a view. That is, I don't have a view about feminism, because feminism, of course, the range of feminism is colossal and unmanageable. So I could not possibly have anything interesting to say about it. But of course, Nuria didn't, you all know her, so she didn't take this for an answer. And so she reminded me and said, she reminded me that I usually have a lot of things to say about some topics which clearly qualify as feminists. So then I had to agree with her and said, yeah, it's true that I have some views about some feminist issues, but it's also true that there are a lot of people already working, and these people are very good and within feminism. So it would be, for me, redundant to express my views on particular issues, on particular feminist issues that people are already doing a great job. So then, okay, so the question is, what am I doing here, right? So this could be the representation of how I stand with regards to this. And so I decided to come here because I think there is something that I can do as a philosopher, which is the philosopher's task, or as I understand this task, which is, and I will quote one of my favorite philosophers. She's called Janet Radcliffe Riches, and she says that this task consists of finding contradictions, showing what follows from what, exposing ambiguities, working out presuppositions, clarifying confusions, and so on. And so I think that these techniques are, in my view, of course, quite neglected, at least in some feminist settings. So, but they are extremely important for how to do feminism. So, and I hope that at least at the end of the talk, you can understand why this is so. So, what this means is that even though I have certain views on how to possibly answer question 1, what is feminism, and question 2, what is feminist for, what I do want is to focus on question 3. That is, as you can see, so I will try to, and as Nuria already said, I will try to identify 5 common traps, pitfalls of discourse and traps of reasoning that we usually fall prey in feminist discourse, and show that by overcoming them, it doesn't matter what our views on 1 and 2 are, we will have a better probability to achieve our feminist goals, irrespective of the kind of disagreements that we may have with regards to 1 and 2. So for each one of the traps, I will formulate the trap as it usually appears in the current discourse, and then I will explain why it is a trap and, of course, how to overcome it. So, okay, so let's start with the first one. The first trap, which I call the anti-naturalism trap, goes along like this. So someone might say this: the systematic differences in environment between men and women show that traditional beliefs about the nature of men and women are wrong. Because men and women are naturally equal, society should be arranged so as to neutralize the situation of comparative disadvantage women are in. So this seems quite a reasonable stand. So why is this a trap? So this is a trap because of the assumption on which it relies as an argument. That is, the extent to which the feminist case seems to rely on pure matters of fact. This is highly problematic, of course, because since matters of fact are subject to empirical evidence, if it turns out that some matters of fact are true, then the feminist case simply had to be abandoned. But clearly, the feminist case does not depend on matters of fact. And even if there are natural differences between men and women, that does not tell us at all how we should proceed, how we should act, what should be done about those differences. This is what philosophers usually call the ought cannot be derived from is principle. And I think that it makes a lot of sense, to be honest, this principle, because of course, from the fact that, for instance, from the fact that it might be true that men are not naturally inclined to be aggressive, it does not follow that they should be given full scope for being aggressive. So our goal as feminists is to show why they shouldn't be aggressive, irrespective of aggression being natural or not. But I believe that there's something even more deep here, which is the quite widespread, not only in feminism, but all over the place, all over every kind of discourses, which is that if something is natural, if something is a natural occurrence of the world, then it is somehow good. So this again, for the same principle that we mentioned before, is completely unwarranted. That something is a result of the natural world does not say anything with regards to whether it is good or bad. And in fact, when we pay close attention to nature, to the state of nature, what we see is that, as John Stuart Mill puts it, he says, "In sober truth, nearly all things which humans are hanged or imprisoned for doing to one another are nature's everyday performances." So we shouldn't go into nature to find any kind of guidance into how we should act. So, and it is true that nature does not at all operate by pursuing what is good for individuals. As we know, nature proceeds by pursuing what's best from the point of view of gene transmission. So it's not difficult to see that some kinds of natural behaviors might be highly adaptive from the point of view of this transmission of genes, but very harmful in terms of the well-being of the individuals affected. So faced with a certain trait, we should ask whether this trait contributes to make the lives of these individuals go better or worse. If better, we should keep it. If it makes lives go worse, then we should try and change it. So this is synthesized in this slogan of xenofeminism, which is the claim that if nature isn't just, then change nature. And of course, I agree with this. So how do we escape this trap? So again, borrowing from Radcliffe Richards, so the first thing that we should do when we are confronted with this appeals to the natural arguments, So the first thing is to challenge the premises of our opponents, and not only the conclusion, and especially try to identify the hidden assumptions of the argument. So, and second, never engage in the terms of the debate as they are presented. That is, it's always possible to translate appeals to the natural into propositions and sentences which are more discussable. So this could be, for example, an example. So let's say that, suppose that someone says that because women are naturally inclined to have children, then they should bear children, they should have children. So of course, the tendency here is to dispute that women should not have children for whatever reason, but it is important to identify the assumption that is being made here. So the most important premise of this argument is hidden, and it's something like this. If we say that women ought to bear children because they are naturally inclined to have children, we are assuming that women should do whatever they're naturally inclined to do, right? So, and then we should reveal this another assumption, which this assumption is assuming, which is the following. It's not only women, is that whatever you are not naturally inclined to do is good for you, or whatever is natural is good, as we saw. So here we have two options, I think. We have either the option of discuss this sentence and show with counterexamples, there are many, many, many counterexamples of things which are natural and are not good. Or we can do another thing, which is to reveal another assumption. And so we simply make explicit the further assumption of the argument, which is you should do whatever it is good for you. So if this is the case, then we arrive at a premise and a proposition which is much more discussable than the previous ones. So we can simply rephrase the whole argument and discuss it with our opponent, and say that, okay, so if you think that what you're trying to say is that someone ought to do whatever is good for them. So if someone ought to do whatever it is good for them, sorry, because there's something missing here. Then what you are trying to say is not that women should have children, bear children. What you're trying to say is that women should bear children if and only if that is good for them. So we arrive at a very different sort of discussion. So much for trap 1. So let's now see trap 2. So as feminists, we constantly appeal to arguments which appeal to the social construction of categories in the following way. This could be one of the formulations. So if something is socially constructed, then it is not inevitable and can be transformed by changing our social practices, and therefore the social constructions are not real and should be changed, more or less so. So one of the paradigmatic example of this idea is Simone de Beauvoir's one is not born, but rather becomes a woman. So again, why is this problematic? So for the reasons that we exposed in the previous trap, we can already see why this is a problematic argument, because as we said, it doesn't matter whether something is socially constructed or not in order to determine whether it should be changed. So as I said, natural injustices should also be addressed by feminism. So this doesn't matter, but it's not only that. There's more to this, which is to think that to identify something as socially constructed is not even enough to show that it can be changed. So take the example that philosophers Sally Haslanger and Essa Diaz-León discuss to support this. So they say that some feminists argue that certain anatomical differences between men and women, such as having a certain height or a certain weight, have been caused by social factors regarding what kind of food and activity in certain society have been considered appropriate historically for men and women. So this means that these anatomical differences are also social constructed, and still that does not mean that can be easily transformed, right? But most importantly, and this is something that you hear a lot in public discourse. So most importantly, the fact that something is socially constructed, it does not mean that it is not real, of course. It seems possible to say that when we talk about social categories like gender, for instance, we are not just talking about the way we represent certain things or about the way that we talk about certain things. We are making claims about the world. So as Haslanger, which has written probably the most important book on social construction and many other things in the last decade, she says social constructions are real as anything, but they are made. They aren't joined in nature, they are joined in the social world. We created them and our collective social activity responsible for their continued existence, but they are no less real as a result. There are ways of dividing up the world which are natural divisions, that is a division which rests entirely on the not natural properties of things. But there are also equally important social divisions. So social categories, the conclusion being that social categories are real, and insofar as they are unjust, they should be resisted. The reason why the Haslanger books, which is being referred here, is called Resisting Reality. So now to complicate matters a bit further, consider the claim being made by an increasingly large sector of feminism, which says that not only gender, but also sex is a social construction. Now, it is important to say that whether we agree or not with this claim, first we need to understand exactly what is being claimed here. So Essa Diaz-León makes the following helpful distinction. So she says that there is an important difference between the social construction of a concept and the social construction of an entity, of a group, of a property. So she takes the example of electron, and she says, well, while it seems undeniable that the concept of electron is socially constructed, that is, it is the result of certain social practices of human societies, it would be implausible to think that electrons themselves are socially constructed. Why? It's perfectly conceivable that the electrons would still exist in a world without human societies and without human practices, right? So likewise, it makes sense to say that the concept of sex is socially constructed. So I will not go into detail here, but it's clear and it's undeniable that what we take biological sex to mean consists of a set of characteristics of different types, and they tend to coexist in a human being, but not always. And then there are different ways to define this concept by giving more or less weight to one factor or another. So in that sense, that decision is being constructed, right? So it's that decision, that human decision that determines what the concept of biological sex is being referred to. So the important thing here is that the claim is not that biological sex is itself socially constructed, but that the concept of biological sex is socially constructed. So, and I think this is a very helpful distinction, because usually in public debate, again, people tend to be outraged by the claim that sex is a social construction. And I believe that outrage is simply because they don't understand exactly what is being claimed. So how do we escape the trap? So we escape the trap very briefly by recognizing that social construction arguments can only lead us so far, as I said. So also recognizing the differences between social constructed of concepts and social constructed of entities. And also recognize the social structures are real, are very real, and insofar as they are unjust, they should be resisted. But now someone might say, yeah, okay, so, but then how do we establish that something is just or unjust or good or bad? We all disagree about what is good or just. So it's kind of pointless to imagine that there is an universal baseline against which we can evaluate our choices. Since nothing is objectively good or just, things can only be good relative to each person's or community's value framework. So this is something that it's very common to hear, and which I label, but a lot has been written about this, the relativism trap. It's not only a trap of feminism again, but it's a very pernicious trap. And I think that especially in the feminism theory, and also in the more activist movement. So why is this a trap? Of course, that to some extent, the existence of moral disagreement suggests that people cannot really have an objective framework on which to contrast what they are claiming to be good or bad. But that does not mean that there cannot be a critical examination of our practices by considering its social and political implications. So if that wasn't the case, if we weren't doing this all the time, then feminism itself would be worthless. So again, how do we escape the trap? So it is important to see that it is perfectly compatible with assuming that even if there is no single right answer, there are some paths of action which are clearly wrong. I mean, everyone would agree that sexual assault is wrong. And even if we don't have a right answer for all our disagreements, at least we can compare our proposals, and we can say that some ways and some paths of action are comparatively better than others. So the thing is that the fact that we have different values does not mean that any moral view is equally acceptable. And that will depend, of course, on the merits of our own reasons provided to sustain our views. But of course, now someone say the merits of our reasons, but isn't reason and rationality precisely something that as feminists we should be fighting against? So yes and no. So the idea would be that reason is gendered. The canonical history of thought has been dominated by men, and therefore reason and rationality is an inherently patriarchal enterprise and should be abandoned in feminist inquiry. So it is true that reason has been monopolized by men. This is absolutely undeniable. It is true that our conceptions of reason and rationality have undervalued and have overlooked important capacities associated with women, which are capacities which have been proven to enable us to respond well to our reasons, for instance, emotions. And these capacities have been unjustifiably overlooked by these dominant conceptions of rationality. This is also true. And it's also true that concepts such as reason, rationality, objectivity have been used to camouflage a biased male perspective about the world. This is all true. But still, regarding the first issue, it seems that this imbalance in the use of reason merely shows that it has been unfairly distributed. That is, what we should be challenging is the unfair distribution and not the ideal of reason itself. Regarding the second point of our conceptions of reason and rationality, again, what should be challenged is the dominant conception of reason. So the conception of reason which devalues and overlooks important aspects which enable us to respond well to our reasons. And so not reason itself. Regarding the third point, again, the fact that there has been and there is an ideological use of reason, not only of reason, but also especially of related concepts such as objectivity and so on. It seems that this is not a problem of objectivity or rationality or reason again itself, but it seems that it is a problem of the lack of it. So the whole point of those feminist critiques, which points to the bias of research that reinforces gender relations, is exactly to say that this is not objective enough. So the problem is, again, a problem of lack of objectivity and not with objectivity itself. Okay, so so far I have identified 4 theoretical traps which we normally fall prey in feminism, and now I will introduce a 5th one, but it's a slightly different trap, which is more practical one. I mean, practical, not that the previous ones were not practical in the sense of their implications, but this one is practical in the sense that it has more to do with what kinds of practices we are engaging in and promoting in our feminist activism, rather than when we're doing theory. So again, this has to do with disagreement. So we often find ourselves in disagreement with others. It's 2 different reasonable people who have access to exactly the same information can arrive to different conclusions. And this is particularly the case with regards to normative disagreements. Normative disagreement is disagreement about whether a certain action or state of affairs is good or desirable or permissible, or if otherwise it's bad or impermissible. So people evaluate and make different judgments about others and behaviors and outcomes of actions. And this may be because they have different values, or even if they have same values, they may disagree on which are the best courses of action to achieve that same goal. So normative disagreement is a part of a normal life for individuals and also groups and also states. And it seems that learning how to resolve normative conflicts and normative disagreement is part of becoming a responsible actor in society. So it is my belief that feminism quite recently, if not always, but it is my belief that as a political movement and as a community, has not been doing justice to this basic fact about our lives and about how we should interact with each other when they're in the face of normative disagreement. So this could be more or less represented like this. I won't make any comments, but just take a very clear example. Consider the way in which the dispute between gender critical feminism and trans-inclusive feminism has been dealt with recently, in which we see an original normative conflict. That's the origin of the problem. Who should and should not be the subject of feminism. And this normative conflict is misrepresented as an aggression and quickly escalates to a point that produces tragedy on both sides, right? So I think that this is not only a problem of this conflict in particular. I think that there's a general tendency within feminism of overreacting to conflict. And so it seems that this is a very accurate statement for me. Sarah Schulman's, when she says that it seems like we're living in a culture of underreaction to abuse and overreaction to conflict. So how to escape this trap? So the first step, this is something that Sarah Schulman presents in the book called exactly Conflict is Not Abuse. So the first thing that she says is we need to, as a community, we need to distinguish between the two. So conflict, she says, consists of a power struggle, so a mutual reasonable sense between individuals or groups or states, while abuse is power over. There is an asymmetrical relation, situation in which someone is being controlled or dominated by another. So how can we distinguish this? So she says that something quite simple, which is simply ask questions. So, of course, when someone, and take this example, when someone tells you, I feel unsafe. So obviously people usually, when they say they feel unsafe, they are not lying. But what she says is that a responsible engagement with problem solving requires more of us. So it requires asking clarificatory questions. So when someone tells you they feel unsafe, you should try to identify and ask, are you feeling unsafe? Or are you instead feeling uncomfortable? Or are you feeling angry? Are you feeling hurt? And if you are feeling unsafe, is it safety from psychological power over and actual harm? Or is it safety from being made uncomfortable by some information about you that you cannot handle in that particular moment? So what she says is that we have to understand as a community that there are a lot of situations at many levels of human interaction, and in those situations we have the opportunity to conflate discomfort with threat, to mistake internal anxiety for external danger, to escalate rather to resolve. And so she says that we need to understand why people escalate and prepare ourselves to do something about it. So people, she says that we escalate into bullying, into shunning, and into exclusion of others. So this kind of idea, the politics of us and them, people overreact because they resist to self-knowledge. So she says that when confronted with situations of conflict and lack of control, people, especially people with either supremacist or chronic situations of past suffering, tend to produce distorted thinking and to misrepresent the difference and the self-criticism as a threat. But most importantly, I think for our purposes, is the second point, which is people escalate because of corporate identity. That is, groups encourage this overreaction. That is, the groups we are creating, they create their identity around negative values. And these negative values also camouflage a very sad fact about how we are making people eligible for compassion. There is a very limited understanding in our circles of how to understand what is it to care for others. So it seems like you are only eligible for compassion if you have been abused. And people are so desperate and so needy of have their legitimate pain acknowledged that often people just have to make an overstatement of what is really happening. So this is really sad, and it is probably the biggest trap of all. So to escape this trap requires that we refuse to be a part of this escalation processes. So Schulman says that group shunning is the centerpiece of most social injustice. To bond or to establish belonging by agreeing to be cruel to the same person is dehumanizing and socially divisive. It causes terrible pain and is unjust. If someone asks you to hurt another person, to refuse to speak to them, to cold shoulder them, to refuse to sit down and hear what they have to say about the consequences of your actions on their lives, then you are being invited into a supremacy system. And those of us who present ourselves as progressive, who support others or help others or take stands, are the ones most responsible for bucking the trend of cruelty. When we don't refuse cruelty, ultimately we stand for nothing. We are hypocrites and our public selves are phony. Progressive people do not shun, and in fact, they intervene when group shunning is being organized. Now, we can and should learn from conflict. We know that it encourages us to re-examine ourselves, to re-inform our beliefs, and to avoid being dogmatic. But perhaps learning from conflict will necessarily lead us to redefine what a safe space means. As journalist Olivia Lang puts it very brilliantly, a safe space might start to mean not somewhere where nothing bad will happen, but a place in which you can develop the skills to acknowledge and handle reality. So to conclude, I have presented you with 5 traps we all have fallen to at some point and to some extent. So to sum up, my suggestions are, so first, reject appeals to the natural. What matters is not how the world is, but how it should be. Second, be precise about the meaning of social construction. That something is socially constructed does not mean that it can be changed, that it should be changed, or that it isn't real. Something should be changed not because it is social constructed, not because it isn't real, but simply because it isn't just. Third, recognize that some courses of actions, not people or communities, are better than others, even if there is no one single right answer. Fourth, combat gender bias with rational thought. Carefully distinguish between legitimate and illegitimate appeals to reason. Fifth, stop the escalation. Distinguish conflict from abuse, learn from disagreement, and help others in your community to get better at handling the often unbearable pain of living. So that's it. These are my references, and thank you very much.